So, we all want to learn how to improvise great walking bass lines. It's some of the best practice that you can do, they sound awesome, and they improve your bass playing in so many ways. Want to be able to create those cool melodic bass lines like James Jamerson? Well, walking bass is going to help with weaving a line through a progression in any style. But, as you're probably aware, improvising a walking bass line can be ridiculously daunting when you're getting started. You have to make up a bass line that outlines the chord progression of the song while sounding interesting, and remember it's got to swing too. Now, I've got a ton of lessons devoted to walking bass lines here on YouTube and already have the complete Simple Steps to Walking Bass course over at the TalkingBass site. So I'm not going to get too deep into all the ins and outs of the notes here. Instead, I'm going to give you 7 important skills that you need to work on either before or during your journey into walking bass that will make things way easier, and they'll remove all of the confusion when idiots like me start talking about arpeggios and scales and this and that, and you get the picture. Throughout this lesson, I'll be demonstrating some of the tips with the chord progression from the jazz standard Sweet Georgia Brown. You can take a look at that material in more detail over at the website. Just click the link in the info below, and there's a backing track there too. I'd also recommend taking a listen to some renditions of the song, some of which I'll link to down there also. So, for number 1, we have the notes on the fretboard. You're going to have to know all of those notes. Remember, when you create a walking bass line, you're going to be weaving your line through a chord progression. You could probably get away with using patterns for a lot of things, but how are you going to find the root notes for each chord if you don't know the notes on the fretboard? So, as a test, let's just try playing root notes through the progression for Sweet Georgia Brown, which I'll show on screen. It's going to be just one note per bar. So all you have to do is look at the chord. If it's a F7, just look for the F and play the F, okay? First, just try playing in a low area within the first 5 or 6 frets. So, how did you do? If you couldn't find those notes easily, then just imagine how hard it's going to be weaving a line around those chords, and that's only in that low area. So next, try playing in an area above the 5th fret, okay? So it's going to be in this no man's land between the 5th fret and the 12th fret. So if you're going to be playing an F, you'll probably play it here at the 8th fret of the A string, and so on. So it's pretty obvious just from that simple bass line that you're going to need to learn those notes. Now, I've got several videos here on YouTube devoted to learning the fretboard, so I'll link to those below, and it's worth mentioning that the test that we just tried is also great practice. Just try playing single root notes working through a simple chord progression. Jazz standards are great for this. For number 2, we have chord tones. Now, chord tones are the notes of a chord, and what are we doing with a walking bass line? We're outlining the chords. Chord tones are the framework that we use for doing this. Scales and chromatic notes are great and they're super important, but they all work around chord tones. So, how do we learn chord tones? Well, we learn arpeggios. Learn your basic set of triads and 7th chord arpeggios, and you're going to give yourself a huge leg up when it comes to getting started with walking bass. So, as another test, just try playing the arpeggios for each chord in our Sweet Georgia Brown progression. You don't need a track for this, you don't need to play in time or anything like that, just look at the chords and then play the arpeggios. So, if we just look at the first 3 chords, let's say, that's going to be F7, so. Then we've got B flat 7. Then we've got E flat 7. And by playing those arpeggios through the progression, you'll actually be able to hear that harmony moving along as you outline those chord tones. So if I just work around those chord tones there, F7, B flat 7, E flat 7, then we got the A flat, E flat, A flat, and then C. So you can hear that chord progression there as I work through the arpeggios. Again, I've got a ton of lessons on arpeggios here on YouTube and a complete course devoted to them in the shape of chord tone essentials over at the website. Learn your major and minor triads, then the major 7, minor 7, dominant 7, and minor 7 flat 5 arpeggios. And they should be enough to just see you through most of the general progressions when you start with walking bass. There's a lot more to chords, there's a lot more chords to learn than that. But those 4 7th chords and those 2 triads should help you out. And trust me, chord tones are going to be the foundation that all of your walking bass studies are built from. For number 3, we have harmony knowledge. Now, this ties in directly to number 2, because chord tones are a fundamental part of harmony, but so are scales, chromatic notes, intervals, and most importantly, the chord progressions themselves. By having an understanding of how chords work together in a key, the actual functional harmony, you'll have a great foundation for building a weaving line. You'll know what scale will work over the chords, and you'll know how to best express the harmony through the line. So, as an example of this functional harmony in action, if we take a look at the chord progression for Sweet Georgia Brown, we're in the key of A flat. Now, we know that because of the key signature, so we know that we're going to be working around the A flat major scale. The first chord in there is F7, so that's chord 6 in A flat. It's also a secondary dominant chord because that should be an F minor 7. You know, in a major key chord, 6 is usually a minor or a minor 7. But we have an F7 there. Now, don't worry too much about the theory behind this at the moment. Just, go with me. So that's chord 6 in the key of A flat, and we can also use the F mixolydian scale there if you want a chord scale that fits. Then we move to B flat 7. That's chord 2 in A flat, but again, it's a secondary dominant chord. And again, we can use the B flat mixolydian scale. Then we have E flat 7, which is chord 5, basic E flat mixolydian. And then we land on the tonic chord of A flat, so that's chord 1. So that progression is 6-2-5-1, which is a very common chord progression. With an understanding of functional harmony, you can see how that progression relates to the key, the chord tones that we can use, the scale notes that we can add into the mix, and it's a lot easier to learn the progression when we know the functional side of it all, when you can learn it by number. Now, I know that a lot of you will have glazed over during that quick analysis of those first 4 chords. It might all just seem like a bunch of meaningless words, but trust me, this is all great to learn, and it's really simple stuff. You just have to be shown in the correct way, building up from the absolute basics. And again, I've got a bunch of lessons devoted to basic harmony and music theory here on the channel, and in the Simple Steps to Walking Bass course, I'll be working through this stuff too, so check out those links below for more details. For number 4, we have listening. If you're going to learn how to play walking bass lines, then you're going to want to have to listen to some walking bass lines. Listen to great jazz and blues players improvising those awesome bass lines. A lot of the time, bass players new to walking get so caught up in the theory of it all that they forget to listen to the things that they're aiming to play. If you don't listen to recordings of walking lines, how are you supposed to know what you're trying to play? It's like trying to teach slap bass to somebody that's never heard a slap bass line. You need to listen to the tone, the feel, the notes, and everything that makes a great walking bass line. Listen to Ray Brown, Paul Chambers, Ron Carter, and every other jazz legend. This is why I recommend listening to the recording of Sweet Georgia Brown rather than just looking at the chart. You want to know the tune and know what a great bass player will do with it. For number 5, you should write walking bass lines. Yes, you need to learn all the chord tones and scales and, everything else so that you can improvise a line, but improvising requires you to compose a line on the fly. Ask yourself this: could you write a walking bass line? Could you compose one? Forget, improvising it on the fly. If you can't write one, how will you be able to improvise one? As a good test, try writing a simple walking bass line through that Sweet Georgia Brown progression. Just work it out, bar by bar. If you don't know where to start or run into trouble at any point, how are you expected to be able to improvise one? Related to the previous point, for number 6, we have learn walking bass lines. Learn pre-composed lines. This is how you develop your vocabulary. All walking bass lines tend to work around a common vocabulary. There are certain lines that pop up time and time again, as well as different ways of working around the chord tone framework. And by learning lines that are either purposely written for study or transcribed from recordings, you'll be able to experience playing a walking line without all the stress and pressure of improvising it. You'll also see how other players work around the chord progressions and learn some of the vocabulary that I mentioned. It's all musical food to digest. In the next month, I'll be releasing an ebook devoted to walking bass lines. It'll feature a variety of walking bass lines through a set of popular jazz standard chord progressions. I'll provide analysis of the harmony and the lines and provide backing tracks for playing along. As well as my book, there are many other books out there providing written walking bass lines. You should try learning lines in both a 2-feel and with a general walk in 4. It can be tricky to memorize a line at first, but when you have a single chorus of a tune learned, you'll be able to always draw upon that material as you develop your studies. And lastly, for number 7, work on your 2-feel before moving on to walking. Walking in 4 is very demanding for a beginner because you have to constantly think ahead, plan the line, keep the groove, and everything else that makes for a smooth line. With a 2-feel, you only have to work around 2 notes per bar on beats 1 and 3. So for an F7 chord, instead of a walking line like this, we could play this. This is a great start to learning walking bass because you get to learn the chord progression of a tune, you get to look ahead as you play while locating the next root note, you get to outline the progression with chord tones and other musical nuts and bolts, and you also get to slowly incorporate 4 quarter note lines as you go along. So for a simple root 5th line through Sweet Georgia Brown, we might play this. So that's about as simple a 2-feel bass line as you could possibly play. It was just root and 5th on 1 and 3 throughout. But beyond that, we can get a little more interesting with different chord tones like the 3rd. We can rhythmically mess around a little and also add some extra quarter notes like you see in this bass line. And this is where we can combine numbers 6 and 7 by providing a simple pre-composed line to learn. This is taken from the upcoming Walk That Bass book, and rather than working slowly through the whole thing, I'll play through it and provide the sheet music and track over at TalkingBass for you to work on. This line all takes place in a low position. In the book, I'll be featuring another line in a higher position before combining them and then moving into a regular walking line in 4, again low, high, and then combined. so that's 7 things that you should work on for making life way easier when it comes to walking bass. Give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below to let me know what other elements of walking bass give you problems. Remember, the lesson material is all there at TalkingBass, so click the link below, and I'll see you next week.